Well, as Mr. Myers mentioned, today is a baccalaureate sermon for the Ambassador Bible Center. It's really a sermon to gather the experience of the year and what has been said and done in the classes and through all the experiences, and in the context of a sermon on the Sabbath with a spiritual intent and a biblical theme and message to sum it all up and to send the young people on their way as they leave and get on with their life. And that, as I have always understood, a baccalaureate sermon is what it's supposed to be. I remember having an ambassador when I graduated, and also I think when I even graduated from high school way back in the day. We've had these baccalaureate sermons. You know, we call this institution Ambassador Bible Center. And that name was very carefully chosen at the time that it was chosen. And it does represent in its name something very, very important for us to consider and to ponder, because obviously we all know the word ambassador carries with it a very, very long legacy within the Church of God. Ambassador College. And we have been able to carry that over into this institution. Not every part of it. It's a one-year program, not 4 as it was in the past. It's not an accredited institution, but we hope and pray that what is done and accomplished here is accredited by God in the lives of everyone who attends it. But the name ambassador carries with it standards of excellence that are very strong. And through the years, this will be the 15th graduating class of Ambassador Bible Center. Through the years, certain traditions have been maintained. I graduated from Ambassador College to pomp and circumstance. You will walk down the aisle to pomp and circumstance. Other things have been brought forward to at least bring in the tradition, physically and certainly spiritually as well, of what the ambassador experience was for so many through the 60-plus years ago that it was fashioned. Bible in the name is very important as well, because what is taught is centered on the revealed truths of the Word of God. And those truths are passed on in the instruction, the teaching at its core. And so the Ambassador Bible Center experience is quite strong for us all. And I wanted to say that at the beginning of my message here this afternoon. You know, every year when the students come in, we have an orientation process for them and an orientation day that begins the entire year. And it's a fascinating thing to watch. This year we had, I think, 42 students sitting in their seats out here. And I've noticed in the last 3 years that I've been here as a resident member of the faculty that the orientation day is quite unique. It's unique in this way. Every student is there usually 5 minutes before class starts in their seat, ready to begin, eager, learning, wanting to learn. That's about the last time you see that. Because as the days and the weeks go on then, life happens. And life doesn't stop just because you're at Ambassador Bible Center. Life continues to happen. Jobs are had. Money runs low. So a second job has to be added. Or where they thought perhaps mom and dad were going to foot the money a little bit more strongly, it doesn't happen, and they have to go out and find work. And they work long hours. And they set in class long hours too, from 8:30 in the morning until 4:20 in the afternoon. And it becomes a long day, and I don't know how they do it. I couldn't do it today, at least in the traditional college curriculum of Ambassador. In a normal university, it's broken up. You go just a few hours a day. You don't go like we do here, but we have to because of the nature of the program. And I don't know how it's done, but it's done. But it takes its toll. That's my point. Because as well-intentioned as everyone is, sickness happens, classes are missed, people come in late, and things happen. And as the year goes along, really Ambassador Bible Center is a microcosm of life, and that is that it comes at us fast. And if we're not careful, as a student, participant, and even all of us in our life, if we're not careful, it begins to threaten to grind us up into what can be called the big average. Just the routine of life, coming to class, working, keeping up with things, which is what life is all about. We have to go to work. We have to meet the challenges that come at us. And there's always the threat that it'll grind us down and it will wear us down and bring us to the point where we may miss one of the most important questions that the Bible holds out to us through a conversation that God himself had with one of his prophets. I'd like for you to turn over to Jeremiah chapter 12. Now, this sermon is, in a sense, aimed at the graduating class, but all the rest of you can listen in because there's a lot for all of us to learn here today. In Jeremiah chapter 12 is a verse that I have thought long and hard about through the years. It has always resonated with me. It comes at a point in the life of the prophet Jeremiah when he has been threatened by those from his own hometown to stop doing the work of preaching the word of God and the message of God. And they are threatening his life. And the work of a prophet is getting to Jeremiah. And he's beginning to question himself. He's beginning to question God. Why did he take this job? God, why don't you take care of those who are evil and working against me, your prophet? And this begins to be a theme. And he talks about it here in chapter 12. And in verse 4 he says, "How long will the land mourn and the herbs of every field wither and the beasts and the birds consume for the wickedness of those who dwell there, because they said he will not see our final end," in echoing the threat that was made to him. And he says this to God, and then God answers Jeremiah in verses 5 and 6. He answers Jeremiah in an answer, actually in a question, as God so often does, that still is a question for every one of us today. He says to Jeremiah, "If you have run with a footman, and they have wearied you, how can you contend with horses? If you've run with people, if you let these people from your hometown of Anathoth grind you down, if you let the everyday struggles of life get to you and discourage you, if you let the stuff that happens in life cause you to lose your focus and your balance and your approach and your passion and your love toward me," God is saying, if that does it to you, how are you going to run with the horses? He uses the image of a horse, which is a mighty and a noble part of a creature. Horses represent a certain majesty and an awe when you really do look at them and watch them work and understand how they are. They truly are. And to run with a horse would be quite a feat of stamina and pacing that we would have to do. And he says, if the footmen wear you out, what are you going to do when the really tough stuff comes? And then he goes on. He says, "And if in the land of peace in which you trusted, when times are smooth, when times are going well, you've got your health, paychecks coming in, got your youth, got a whole future rosy ahead of you. If in the land of peace in which you trusted, they wearied you, these people, these things, then how will you do in the floodplain of the Jordan?" And by using the idea of the floodplain of the Jordan, he's talking about the Jordan River, which in Jeremiah's time was really quite a river. Today, the lower portions of the Jordan in Israel today are nothing more than a ditch with a little bit of trickle of water going through them. You can almost jump over it at various points. But in Jeremiah's day, it was quite a river. And along the banks of the river was the underbrush and the growth, in which were the lions and other animals. And if any human went into the plains of the Jordan, they had to be constantly vigilant and aware because it was a dangerous place to be. And so again, he asked him the question, if the time of peace has worn you down, what are you going to do when you're in the floodplain of the Jordan? If the footmen that you've contended with have wearied you, how will you contend with the horses? And I've chosen for the title of my sermon today another translation of this that I think puts it even better. If you're tired from running a foot race, how will you race against the horses? How will you race against the horses? And that's the question God put to Jeremiah. Now, what was the answer that Jeremiah gave? What is the answer that you would give? I will tell you that it is more than just a simple yes. It's more than a simple I will. It's more than a simple I'll be there. The answer that Jeremiah gave and the answer that you and I must give is far more than just one word, one sentence, an emotional reaction in the moment. I want you to think about that, because what I'm going to do here in the remainder of the time is give you 4 examples. We're going to look at 4 examples from the Bible of individuals who raced with the horses, and look at their lives and what it was that they had to do to race with the horses, and to not be overcome by people, by events, by the passage of life, or by the times of danger that might have been there, and what that means to us. Let's look at the first one, and let's just stay here with the prophet Jeremiah. Let's go back to chapter 1. As Jeremiah was called by God, of course, he was known from the womb in verse 5. God says, I've ordained you a prophet to the nations. But Jeremiah's response when this conversation was had was this: O Lord God, behold, I cannot speak, for I'm a youth. I am a youth. But the Lord said to me, do not say I am a youth, for you shall go to all to whom I send you, and whatever I command you shall speak. Don't say that you're a youth. Now, what did he mean? I think it was far more than his age that was really at stake here. He could say that just as you and I can say that. And for a graduate of the Ambassador Bible Center, you could say the same thing. We're young, and you are. You have your life ahead of you. Those of you that are alumni in the room today and listening in, you're young as well, and you have had the experience and you think it through. And all the rest of us look at this and what is there to learn? I think that Jeremiah likely saw what his calling and his office meant. It wasn't just that he was a young person and he felt inadequate. I'm not a young person anymore, and I feel inadequate. And after 40 plus years of being in the ministry, I recognize my inadequacies and want to dig deeper to overcome those and get a second chance and get a second wind and do them any better. No, it's more than that. I think that Jeremiah saw. What he saw was his calling and what it meant. And this he was trying to shy away from. And being reticent in taking up the responsibility of a calling is something that happens to all of us at various ages as life comes at us. As the year goes along in Ambassador Bible Center, as October and December come, and the new calendar year turns to January, and the fatigue sets in, and what am I going to do with all of this understanding? And how am I going to get through it all? What does it all mean? And life, we tend to begin to think we're not up to the job. And as a young adult, you may see that what is required and hesitate. Sometimes I think that is a matter of our youth today, that there is a hesitation to commit to being a disciple and a follower of Jesus Christ. To the young people of the Ambassador Bible Center, to the alumni who set out here today, I want to say this: we need you. We do. We need you to take up what you have heard and listened and been exposed to. We need you, men and women. All of us do. Many of us have been at this for decades, and we're still going to continue to work at it, but we now need you more than ever. And it is not just the fact that you're 19 or 22 or 28 or 32 or 37. It's not the years, it's the miles. And the experience, and it's the heart. That's what is needed. The Church of God needs you. It needs you to commit to becoming a disciple, a servant, and wherever that will lead you. Because God said to Jeremiah, don't let your youth, don't let the calling, don't let what you may see down the road cause you to put it down. He said, I will send you where I want. I will take you and I will send you where I want you to go. That is a matter of faith. God will send you where He wants you to go if you don't shy away from the responsibility and the opportunity of becoming a disciple and wherever that will lead you. You don't know until you take that step. You don't know until you decide, I will go and I will respond to that call. And I will not let my youth or any inexperience stop me from serving where I can and becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ. Don't let the culture, our modern popular culture, scare you or capture you. I put that down as a challenge. Our modern Western culture is the most alluring, and it is the most enticing, and it is the most glamorous that Satan has conceived in all the thousands of years of human experience. It's capable of alluring Christians, Jews, Muslims. I was reading an article yesterday how many Muslims who come into America and after a few years, they're just like Western youth. And their Muslim values and ideals are gone. And it's a problem, a chronic problem within that community. It doesn't matter if you're Asian, European, American, whatever it is, this modern popular culture that we are a part of is very, very alluring. And it can grab and sort any one of us if we allow it. Don't give in. Don't give in. Let yourself become a servant of God and begin that path of being a disciple. And don't let your youth, don't let any part of your experience keep you from doing that. As a young person, decide to reach beyond the attractive popular culture that we have today and live a life of integrity, devoted to God. A life of integrity devoted to God. Dedicate yourself to God and let God send you where He will. Let God do that. Don't shirk back from any opportunity. He will take one with a heart to go and to do the job, and He will send you where He wants to go if you submit yourself to Him. Trust in God. Proverbs 3 and verse 5 says, commit your ways to Him and acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. That He did with Jeremiah. Let's go to a second example. Let's turn back to the book of 1 Samuel. A woman named Hannah. In 1 Samuel chapter 1. A woman named Hannah, without a wife, without a son, without a child, every year went up with her husband to worship God. And she was without a child. 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 11 tells us that she had a bitterness of soul about her as she went up and asked God to look upon her affliction, to remember her, to give her a child. And she made a vow that if that happened, she would devote him to the Lord. In verse 28 of chapter 1, when she finally had that child, she brought him back. She followed through with her word. Samuel, who became a prophet of God. And she left him there with Eli, and she said in verse 28, therefore, I also have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. And they worshiped there. Now, what Hannah did was an act of supreme sacrifice, complete sacrifice. It's hard for us to understand it in its totality. It was more than just being barren. God answered that, as He often does, providing people with children years perhaps after they have given up on having a child. I've seen that happen many, many times through the years. God can do that. But here's Hannah. And she could have been tempted, and maybe she was, we don't know, to say, well, God understands. I need this son. Because in the world that Hannah lived in, a child and a son was her Social Security, her pension, her Medicare, her disability, her future, all wrapped up into one person. There was no other social safety net for a woman and a widow if that happened in that world. And that's why children were so important, and why barrenness was looked upon as it was, as we see several times in the Scriptures. And so Hannah had Samuel, and she could have reasoned any number of different ways to have gone back on her commitment and on her vow to God. But she didn't in the story, and she left him and said, I will lend him to God as long as he lives. Now, as you read on in the story, you know that Hannah had 5 other children, but she didn't know that she was going to have 5 other children the day she walked away from Shiloh without her little boy in her arms. That was sacrifice. Hannah decided to race with the horses when she made that decision. She decided not to get ground down by the big average, the humdrum of life. She gave a life to God, expecting nothing in return, a mother and her child, and she gave it up, not knowing what was going to happen. And we read that story, and it's full of a lot of teaching to us, but it is there that she gave up her son, fulfilling her vow to God. To run with the horses, to race with the horses, means to live a sacrificial life. A sacrificial life. That's what she did. She was willing to sacrifice her son, not to death, or not in the same way that God asked Abraham to take Isaac and do what he did, not even as the Father did with Jesus Christ, but to leave him in the care of a system that she didn't know what was going to happen, and not be able then to be involved in his life every day. And only a mother can understand what kind of a feeling that would have been. But the sacrifice that it took to give her life, to give up a life, and at that point, her part in that life was total. And that's what it means to race with the horses, to sacrifice. To sacrifice your life to a greater cause, to a cause that's bigger than you, devoting your all. When Paul writes in Romans 12 that we are to be a living sacrifice, in verse 1, living sacrifices, that's the life that we are called to. That's the life of a disciple. That's the life that we teach when we teach the revealed truths of God to every class that comes through Ambassador Bible Center. Those are the truths that we learn every week in services. And as we study the Word of God, we study about what it means to be live a life of sacrifice. I've had opportunity to talk about this concept with some over the last year or so as we talk about it with some other young adults, to recognize what it will take to move the Church of God, to move the United Church of God forward, to move it off center, to move it into a progressive stance to make a difference in this world, to not just perpetuate itself as part of the big average, but to see it grow and to see it develop and to see it make a difference with people who respond to the message, to see it make a difference with the continuing generations of young people who are being born into the families of the Church of God, the United Church of God, on a regular basis. Because the United Church of God continues to live and breathe and grow and develop and needs people who will give a sacrificial effort to be a disciple. And to even in those cases where God is calling and makes it clear that that's where he's leading an individual, to be a minister. That's what it takes. And to do that is to set out on a life of sacrifice. And our members, and those of you that are here visiting and members listening in, and all of us who are here, we know what it takes for decade after decade after decade to show up and to obey God and to worship God, to go to the feasts, to do what is right, to serve God, to support the work and all of its institutions, all of its activities, a camp, a good works project, an institution like Ambassador Bible Center, and to keep a dream, to keep a hope, to keep a truth alive. We all know what that means, because that is what it means to race with the horses. And we have been doing that day after day, year after year, decade after decade. And then sometimes it takes a little extra special sacrifice in our own lives that resonates with us, and we know it's a little special. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about a life. I'm talking about a commitment that it will take to see something grow and to see something develop. And we have a lot of that. And that's what it means to race with the horses and to step out, just as Hannah did, just as she knew that she needed to accomplish that. Let's look at a third example. It's in Acts 17. This is another individual who decided to race with the horses. It's the Apostle Paul. I get the joy-filled opportunity every year to take students through the book of Acts. And I always tell them it's like going over and putting your finger into an electrical socket to read the book of Acts every year. It gives you a jolt. You'll always learn something new. And I hope that all of us will periodically dip into the book of Acts to get a kind of a jolt, an awakening of how people acted when they were motivated and moved by the Spirit of God. The Apostle Paul was one on one part of his life. And this year it struck me as I passed over this section where the Apostle Paul was in the city of Athens in chapter 17. After having been run out of Thessalonica, passing through Berea and having to keep on going and finding himself all alone because he'd left Timothy and Silas and his companions along the way in the previous cities, and he'd been beaten up, kind of roughed around a bit. And he perhaps was thinking about that time, well, maybe I could go back and pick up a tent-making job someplace along the line. And he finds himself in verse 16 waiting for them, his friends, in Athens, this great city of the ancient world, with all of its temples, with all of its glory, with all of its culture. And he was by himself, and his spirit was provoked within him when he saw that the city was given over to idols. Now, Paul could have taken a well-deserved break. He could have booked himself into a weekend in Cancun, but he didn't do it. He could have just sat in the cafes of Athens and drank strong coffee and eaten pastries and souvlaki or whatever else, and just kind of marveled at the temples, which is about what you do today. If you go to Athens, that's about all there is to do, except the temples are in ruins because they haven't done much in all these thousands of years in Greece. But he didn't do it. In Paul's day, when he was in Athens, they say that there were more idols and temples than there were men. Which is why when he saw, it says here, when he saw that the city was given over to idols, they were on every corner, and they were in their heyday. The Temple of Athena, on the Acropolis, what we call the Parthenon, dedicated to their chief deity Athena, and all the others that were there. And he looked at them, and he walked around the streets for how many days? Seeing this, observing it, and it says that he was provoked within himself. The sense of the Greek word is that he did what we would call today a slow burn. The anger, the passion, the intensity, the indignation began to rise within Paul. Step by step, corner by corner, plaza by plaza, day by day, until he couldn't resist it. He said, I'm not going to take any more of this. This is awful. He had such a passion for God. He had such a love for God. He walked with God and was such a friend with God that he took that as an indignation, what he saw. A city wholly given over to idols. He loved God so passionately with all of his heart because he took that command from Deuteronomy literally. You will love the Lord your God with all your heart. That bears our thoughts. That bears our consideration. And Paul, instead of becoming a tourist, decided to race with the horses. And he went into the marketplace, and he went into the synagogues, and he engaged. Because that's what you did in those days. Now, we don't go into Kroger and Meijer today and engage in the same way, but we take the tools that are available to us, and we engage a world in front of us just as given over to idolatry. Do we do it with the passion? I think that we do. Paul smashed the idols that were around him with his words. He eventually got called up into a debate with the philosophers on Mars Hill and kind of a graduate seminar with the members of the Oxford, Yale, Harvard faculty of the day. And he gave one of the most fascinating sermons in all the Bible, certainly in the book of Acts, to the unknown God. And he made known that God to them because he knew that God. And he loved that God. And what he saw was an affront to him. And he smashed the idols of his day with his words. And today Paul's words live on, and the idols are gone. Oh, they're replaced with different idols that we have today. And we have, just as I said, a culture that is full of insidiously conceived idols today that, in a sense, outmatch what Paul had to do, and that we have to contend with as well. But instead of a life of ease in Athens, he decided to race with the horses. And to race with the horses, as Paul shows us, is to love God. To love God with a passion that moves us to engage the world in which we live and to seek to change it. And we know that we're not going to necessarily change the world. We know that. We look at the problems in the Middle East, the political problems, the ethnic, the religious divisions of our world. We see the economic problems. We see people, well-meaning, good people, who take up the call to arms, and even in our own country, in the United States, and seek to change the system and to change Washington, to join a Tea Party movement or to support a particular ideology and movement and seek to change. And we see that just get caught up in the big average and come to nothing. And if we're not careful, we can let that diminish our passion. We are not going to change the world, but we can show people who are caught up in the chaos of this life and of their own personal lives, we can show them how to fix their life with the gospel of Jesus Christ and the kingdom of God. We're not going to change Washington. We're not going to change Europe. We're not going to change the Middle East. We can discern it. We can explain it. We can talk about it. We can even warn about it. But we also can teach people how to fix their life with a message that works and engage them if we have the passion and if we truly love God. That's what Paul did in the marketplace, in the synagogues of Athens in his day. That's what it means to race with the horses. Now let's look at a fourth example. It's in Matthew chapter 14. It's the Apostle Peter. Matthew chapter 14. Well-known story from the Gospels. In verse 13 begins the story where Christ feeds 5,000 people with all the loaves and fishes that were before him, and performs a miracle in the midst of engaging and teaching many, many people. And they were there long enough that there was a great multitude upon them. He had compassion. He healed them. And it came to the evening, and they couldn't be sent away to the nearest fast food market to get hamburgers or fried chicken. And so they took what they had, and Christ performed a miracle. After teaching all day, and he fed 5,000 people. They were all filled with what was before them. 12 baskets of food were taken up later. but women and children and men were filled. And then verse 22 tells us that immediately after, Jesus sent his disciples into a boat to go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. He went up into a mountain to pray. He just needed a little rest. He'd been teaching all day. It had been hard work. You teach all day, you sit all day in class. I mean, you even sit for 2 hours in services. It's hard work. Christ needed a little bit of a break. He sent the disciples off into a boat, and they got out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. But as often happens there, a wind came up, began to toss them around. The disciples fell asleep in the boat, and in the middle of the night, they saw Christ walking toward them. And they saw him, in verse 26, walking on the sea. And they were troubled, and they thought it was a ghost. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer. It is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And so Christ said to Peter, "Come." Now Peter made a decision at that moment. As he looked over the bow of the side of the boat and he saw Jesus out there, he talked with him. He said, "Command me to come to you." Christ said, "Come on." And Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water to go to Jesus. Now, if that's not racing with a horse, I don't know. We read this and try to imagine it and think about it. He decided to race with the horses. He could have stayed in the boat where it was somewhat safe out on that stormy sea. But he had just been moved by what had taken place hours earlier. He'd seen the miracle of feeding 5,000 people. He had heard the teaching. He had seen people healed. What Jesus had done in that day was give a lot of knowledge and teaching of the gospel and of God's way of life. They'd had a full day at ABC, capped off with a potluck meal that fed 5,000. I want you to think about it. That's what was really going on. They were getting a lot of head knowledge, and Peter was inspired by that. But this event that takes place now with the walking on the water and the storm-tossed sea is not some little trick that Christ conjured up and caused to be recorded to impress us with that Jesus walked on the water. And you already know that Peter walked on the water for a short time, and then he got his eyes off of Christ. He saw that, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be doing this. And he started to sink under his own weight until he was rescued by Christ. Because it says when he saw that the wind was boisterous in verse 30, he was afraid, beginning to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand, caught him, and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Peter decided to race with the horses, but then he got his eyes off of Christ. And Peter was that type of person, as we know from the stories of the Gospels. He was always wanting to be right up next to Christ, to always be the first one to give the answer, always raising his hand in class, always giving an answer, always asking a question. He wanted to be right next to Christ, and that's not a bad thing, and he wanted to learn. But Peter's like you and I. We want to follow Christ, and we want to be right there too, but then we get bogged down by the big average. We get bogged down by the wind and the waves. We suddenly look around and, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be doing this. I'd rather be in a peaceful land, and contending with these footmen is kind of hard. And we begin to sink under our own weight of doubt, fear. And it's at that moment that we all have to do a double check and realize that, yeah, we want to be near Christ too, and we're going to fail. I'm going to fail too. But we still want to be next to Christ. We want to be as close to him as we possibly can. And for that, we need his help. Peter decided to race with a horse. As long as he kept his eyes on Christ, he could. And as long as we keep our eyes upon Christ, we can. But when we take our eyes off of Christ, we will sink under the weight of our own life. We have to keep focused on Christ. We have to. Our own strength is not enough. Our desire is always there. Our desire to be next to Christ and to be pleasing to God is always there. But sometimes, as we say, life comes at us fast and it wears us down, and we begin to doubt. And we have to then recalibrate to keep our eyes there. And as much as we desire to be like Peter, we have to keep trying. If you look at this day in the story here in the Gospels, they'd had a day of teaching. You've had a year of teaching at Ambassador Bible Center. You have filled your Bibles, you have filled your notebooks, you have taken notes, you have received reams of handouts. The copier machines have been busy through the year by the instructors giving you all kinds of information that you have stuffed wherever you stuff that stuff and whatever you do with that stuff. And you will look at it sometime, somewhere, so you say. But you're going to move on with your life. You've had a day of teaching. You've had a year of teaching, just like they had. Now you're going out on the waters. The storms can come up quick. And what you have learned is going to be put to test. That's what this story is really telling us. You're going to contend with the footmen. Don't let them weary you. Decide you're going to continue to race with the horses. Take the knowledge that you've been given at Ambassador Bible Center, all this head knowledge, from the epistles of Paul, from the general epistles, from the prophets, from Christian living. Take all of that head knowledge and put it right here. Put it in your heart. Let it be written upon your heart for all of us. Because that's how we will continue to race with the horses. We can't keep it on the pages of our Bible. We can't keep it stuffed in our notebooks and printed or electronic form. We have to write it on our heart, because one day there's going to be a storm that comes up in your life. And you're going to want to walk on water, but you may run into some doubt. Children are going to come, marriage will come, sickness might be there, a job might be lost, an untimely death might come in. Something might happen that will test you and will test me, as it does all of us in our race, in our life, and in our journey. And it is then that we will need to call forth that instruction that we had from our heart. And if we do, because it's been put there as we've lived it, then we'll be a little bit better able and prepared to keep our eyes on Christ and walk on the water with His help and not be burdened down and worn down. Take the head knowledge that you have been given and turn it into heart knowledge. We've looked at Jeremiah. Seize your youth. Let God send you where He will. Let God send you where He will. Seize the opportunity that is in front of you. From Hannah, we learned that we must live a sacrificial life, and we must be willing to be living sacrifices and to give our all. From Paul, we saw that we must have a deep passion that engages this world where we find it and seeks to help it and seeks to impart what you have been given, what we have and what we hold in the church of God before Him. And from Peter, we learned that we must keep our eyes focused on Jesus Christ. And so that brings us back to Jeremiah chapter 12. Let's go back to that again. Because the question that God put to Jeremiah, if you'll notice, it was not an answer. It was a question. And it's a question that we all must settle for us as well. If you have run with the footmen and they have wearied you, then how can you contend? How can you race with horses? And if in the land of peace in which you trusted they wearied you, then how will you do in the floodplain of the Jordan? That's the question that he put to Jeremiah. You know the answer that Jeremiah gave? He gave his life. He didn't just say yes. He didn't just say send me. He didn't say okay. He answered it with his life. And that's the only answer that you and I can give too. We can only give our life as a sacrifice, as a commitment. So the question that I leave with you, Ambassador College, Ambassador Bible Center graduates, the question that I leave for all of us to think about here this afternoon: will you race with the horses?